For those of you who have played Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm sure that you are well aware that the game really takes its time. And this is not unusual for Rockstar. They tend to be fairly self-indulgent with their games. But this is the first time I've played a Rockstar game and never a single time felt as though they were wasting my time by stretching things out past the point that they needed to, and so I wanted to devise a little bitty experiment. You see, in open world game development, there's something that designers usually hold to, which is known as the 40-second rule of open world games. I've made videos talking about this before, where I analyzed The Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild, and Fallout New Vegas, and I eventually did it with some Assassin's Creed games as well, which basically analyzes, while exploring and going through the open world, how often notable events occur, and we measure this time, the space-time between those individual moments, and that tells us how spread out everything is. If you want to picture like the game map, the player characters on that game map, and then you draw a circle around that player character, the radius of that circle is the distance that they can travel in what is usually 40 seconds, and you want to make sure that on the circumference of every single circle, no matter where the player is, there is always something of interest that could happen within that area, if that makes sense. In layman's terms, I suppose, the easier way of explaining it would basically be that you just want to make sure something happens to draw the player's attention roughly every 40 seconds, if not sooner. Sometimes you can get away with roughly 60 seconds depending on the game that it is, but usually open world developers aim for 40 seconds. In my testing, The Witcher 3, for instance, landed at 32.2 seconds on average between events of interest while just exploring the game world. Breath of the Wild landed at like 41.8 seconds between each moment of interest, and then Fallout New Vegas landed at 48.8 seconds between each moment of interest, likely due to the slower movement speed and the fact you can't really run in that game. There's a lot of things about that game that make it more difficult to analyze in this way. And I think part of the reason that this is so interesting to me is because when playing an open world, there's a balancing act that has to be struck. If you don't do a good job of balancing your open world, then it's very easy for it to come off as just empty and not really a world. But if you pack it too tensely and densely, it feels as though it's just a video game. This is what we often see with some Ubisoft titles, where it feels as though things are just sprinkled in without any rhyme or reason or purpose behind it. They're just putting content in for the sake of distracting the player. It's almost like developers are terrified of having any sort of emptiness sitting there. They're terrified of blank space, except Rockstar, which is what's so interesting. So basically what I did is I went through the game. I played about 2.5 hours where I was just exploring. I didn't pursue any missions or quests intentionally. I simply hopped on my horse and started exploring, going hunting, going through the map as best I could, trying to find notable places or events, things that were just interesting. This is usually denoted in Red Dead with Arthur taking out his notebook and sketching something, but I just wanted to explore the map and broaden it out so that I had a fuller range that I could explore later. Like I said, I did this for about 2.5 hours. Then afterwards, I turned on some Family Guy and went through the footage again, noting on my stopwatch a lap every time something interesting happened. And then I took all of that data, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and made stuff. So this is the chart that I ended up with. There were roughly 109 instances over the course of this roughly 2.5 hour experiment where things were notable enough for me to look at it and say, you know what, that pulls my attention away from what I'm doing. And so if we look at the chart, we can break it up into roughly 4 sections, which is what I'm going to do right now to explain what was going on. In the first chunk of the chart, you can see all of these events that took place and floated around the 70 to 80 second mark, which is the average for this chart. This was general exploration, going through fields, forests, just looking around, not trying to do anything specific. The larger peaks are when I went through a field, a larger space of the map, and was just riding my horse, not really doing anything else, just kind of vegging out, sitting back and riding. Then it drops significantly when I reach a town and there's a ton of stuff in that town that pulls and piques my interest. And then I go back out into the world and start exploring even more in these broader open areas. which explains why the peaks are even higher. And then I get into the more densely populated areas where there's many more moments of interest, and then I go back out into the fields again. Now, all of this is, to be completely honest, completely expected. You would expect for cities to be more dense than open fields and forests. You would expect everything to be stretched out and packed depending on where you were in the map. But that hasn't always been the case. Many game developers don't actually adhere to what I would call contextual density. They don't actually pack the world depending on where you are. A game such as Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I love dearly, does not tend to contextually densify their game maps. Sure, there's quest markers and things that start and originate in the city to begin with, but they do make a very active and concerted effort to make sure that even the mountaintops and the hillsides are just as interesting as the cities. Rockstar takes a different approach. Instead, they make sure that all of the human distractions and things that you would expect in the city are there, and then when you go outside of the cities, it's just emptiness. Which is actually kind of cool, because most developers are terrified, as I said earlier, of blank space. They're terrified of emptiness, of quiet, of this sort of solemn gloom that just sits over the player. They're terrified to let the player just do stuff and think, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's actually very, very good that they do this. First of all, because Red Dead Redemption 2 is set in 1899 in the Wild West. And yes, I use the term Wild West very loosely because it's not very far west in all actuality. But still, you're going through all of these very, very scarcely populated areas, and you're just exploring nature. And you feel as though you are a cowboy exploring those areas. It doesn't feel as though there should be stuff there that there isn't. Look at Watch Dogs, for instance. That world felt as though there should be interesting stuff all over, but it landed flat and felt dead because it didn't earn the moments of interest that were there, and it didn't provide them when the game needed them or contextually demanded them. Instead, Rockstar earns every moment of interest that you would expect, and even some that you wouldn't expect, that I won't spoil for you now, because so many of these interesting events that can happen to you are so much better if you can just experience them yourself when you play through the game. All of this is earned. And this is what makes Red Dead Redemption 2 so special. This is what separates this game out from so many open worlds. I don't think it's new. Other games have done this, such as Persona 5. Persona 5 reveled in this. But what Rockstar has done with Red Dead Redemption 2 is brought it to a Western open world game, which is a huge step, even if it doesn't seem like it. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about reveling in the minutia, in the emptiness, in all of this just what would normally be considered boredom. They revel in it. They embrace it. They make it the focus. So as you're exploring the world as a cowboy, you feel as though you're a cowboy. If you're hungry, you got to eat. If you want to go sleep, you got to start a campfire. If you want to take your horse out, well, you better groom him first and feed him to make sure he's okay to go. All of these things games normally cut out. But instead, Rockstar embraces it. And it just goes to show you a lot of players don't necessarily know what they want until you give it to them, until you show them that they do need that. When many people heard about the survival elements in Red Dead Redemption 2, they were terrified. They thought that this was going to bring the experience down, but instead what we've seen is that it's actually brought everything up. It actually pulls you into the game even more when the game demands more from you. And that, I think, is the lasting legacy of Red Dead Redemption 2's open world design. Not that they stretch these moments out to double what it is for The Witcher 3, for Breath of the Wild and New Vegas. Those games averaged 40 seconds in between each notable moment of interest while exploring the world. Red Dead Redemption 2 averages at 80 seconds in my testing. Roughly 87, actually. I rounded it down because there were some extra moments that I didn't think were worthy. That is crazy. Doubling the time. It may not seem like a ballsy move, but it really is, to stretch the world out so far where you're not afraid to leave the player alone with their thoughts and the scenery for over a minute. That is a huge, huge shift in how these games are being developed. And if you don't think it is, just go back and look at all the other open world games that you've been playing. And imagine if half that stuff were stretched out. Double. That's crazy. That's what they've done. And I think it's pretty remarkable. And so the lasting legacy for Red Dead, I don't think it's going to be the graphics. I don't think it's going to be the crappy implementation of HDR. I don't think any of that's going to matter. I think the lasting impression and thing that we're going to take away from Red Dead is that Western open world games, Western RPGs, Western anything can revel in emptiness, in the minutia, in the moment, in all of these little things that normally we would try to cut out because they're distracting, because they require too much, because players don't want to do that. It's not fun, all of these things. And that is a huge shift in the industry. And I cannot wait to see where it takes us. Yeah, I'm back. I figured I should probably make an outro for this video. Thank you for watching. I love you all for watching. You guys are scholars and saints, each and every single one of you. If you like what you saw, consider subscribing, maybe like the video. I don't know. I don't care. It's not like I can tell what you do with your time. And if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon or potentially the merch store. We got some cool stuff up there now. Check it out if you want to. If not, like I said, I don't know. I don't care. I guess this is a bad a bad pitch for support. Normally you're supposed to be like, yeah, make sure you support me or else I'm going to quit forever and I'm going to burn my hair off. Like, no, I'm not going to do anything like that. If you want to support me, great. If not, let's just talk about video games and have fun. That's all I got to say. That was a terrible outro. I'm sorry. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.